Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something pretty monumental. We're looking into the spiritual bedrock of Korea. It's a tradition known formally as Korean shamanism or Muism.
Right, and this is a spiritual current that's so old, I mean, it predates written history.
Exactly. And yet, it's been incredibly resilient. It seems to have successfully fought off, or maybe it just absorbed every major religious and political challenge for, well, thousands of years.
That's really the word for it, absorption. We're diving deep into Musak, as it's often called academically. You know, people sometimes think it's just fortune-telling.
Yeah, that's the common image.
But our sources show it's much more fundamental. It's really the prehistoric core of Korean spirituality. It's a folk religion, so it's decentralized, no central text or anything like that. Yet it's profoundly syncretic. It blends these native beliefs with elements from Buddhism, Taoism, and even Confucianism throughout Korea's history.
Okay, so let's try and unpack that apparent contradiction. If it's so fundamental, so core, why does it often feel overshadowed by these, major world religions?
Our mission today really is to trace how this indigenous faith, this deeply resilient cultural foundation, didn't just survive when global doctrines arrived. We want to see how key historical figures actively integrated shamanic beliefs into new systems.
Figures like the Silla monk Wanyo, for instance.
Right, him. And also the 19th century founder Cho Jin-ae. We want to understand that mechanism of spiritual survival, from ancient times right up to the pressures of modern high-tech South Korea.
Okay, to do that, we really have to start at the beginning.
Yeah.
The ancient foundation. Muism's origins are, well, they're firmly rooted in prehistoric Korean societies.
Before written history.
Exactly. It seems to be a mixture of animism, the idea that spirits are in everything, nature, objects, and totemism, connections to specific ancestral animals. This existed long before any organized government or imported religion showed up.
And probably the most lasting trace of those ancient roots is the Dangun myth, wouldn't you say? It sort of sets the template. Oh, absolutely. The Dangun myth is essential. It's the story of the son of the heavenly god, Hanelim, who comes down from the spirit world to earth and founds the first Korean kingdom.
Classic shamanistic themes there, right? Divine ancestry connecting the rulers to the heavens.
Precisely. It initially sacralized the royal line itself, established this powerful link between heaven, the ruler, and the land itself.
So you have this heavenly god, Hanelim, as the supreme deity. But here's where it gets interesting, what our research calls the supreme deity paradox.
He's the ultimate boss, but...
Right, but people didn't really worship him directly in daily life. It's a huge paradox, and it really shows how practical Moism is.
Okay, why? Why bypass the top god?
Well, Hanelim was seen as maybe too distant, too remote for, immediate practical help. So people focused their worship on the spiritual forces that had a much more direct impact on their lives.
Like local spirits. Exactly.
Ah.
Lesser gods, powerful nature spirits. The mountain spirit, Sanshin, is everywhere in Korea, and, crucially, ancestor spirits. If you're a farmer needing rain or your family's facing illness, you need someone local, accessible, someone who can intervene now.
Not a distant cosmic ruler.
Right. Not someone focused only on the grand cosmic order. You need help with this harvest, this sickness.
And this is where the intermediary becomes absolutely critical. The shaman, the mudang. They're the ones connecting the human world's needs with the spirit world's power.
Absolutely vital. The shaman mudan for women, paksu for men, they were the centerpiece of early Korean spiritual life. They weren't just like priests. They were community leaders, advisors, and really importantly, healers.
Their whole power came from successfully navigating that line between the living and the spirits.
Yes. And what really stands out about Buddhism is how it established two totally different ways to gain that spiritual authority. It shows how deep and sometimes, frankly, traumatic the calling could be.
Okay, tell us about these two paths.
Well, on one hand, you've got the hereditary shamans, the sesubmu. They inherit the role. They learn the rituals, the songs, usually through long apprenticeships within the family, maybe from their mother-in-law, for example. Their power comes from this specialized passed-down knowledge.
Right, knowledge-based.
But then you have the complete opposite, the possessed shaman, the kangsanmu.
Yeah.
Here, power isn't inherited. It's almost violently imposed by the spirit.
Imposed? How?
They're chosen typically through this intense, often crippling ordeal called sinbayung, the calling sickness. Our sources describe it not just as feeling unwell, but as a severe psychological and physical trauma.
Like a breakdown.
Almost. It can involve months, even years, of intense physical pain, vivid hallucinations, hearing things, seeing things, acute stress, deep depression. It sounds terrifying.
Wow, that sounds like a genuine spiritual crisis.
Right.
Like your old self has to be destroyed to make way for this new role.
That's really the core of it. The person suffers intensely until they finally accept their destiny, and the sources are clear. Only the formal initiation ritual, the Gut, where the community publicly acknowledges the possession, can actually cure the suffering.
So the initiation transforms them.
Exactly. It transforms this tormented person into a recognized shaman. Their authority comes directly from that personal suffering and their direct link to the divine. It's validated by the ordeal itself.
Before we move on from these ancient roots, we have to touch on the gender aspect, because Miriamism was, well, fundamentally different from the systems that came later. It was very much a woman-centric practice in early Korea.
Yes, this is such a key point, especially when you compare it to later Confucianism. Miriamism really empowered female religious authority. These women were often called mansin, which means 10,000 spirits. A powerful name.
10,000 spirit.
And the female Mudang often handled the really big stuff, the life and death issues, the major crises. They were seen as the miracle workers. Male shamans, the Paksus, certainly existed. They might act more like spiritual doctors or do divinations. But the female authority was frequently seen as more potent, the true channel.
So it gave women a crucial sphere of influence of social power that got squeezed out later.
Violently restricted later, yes, under Confucian patriarchy, but initially it was central.
Okay, so we have this powerful, practical, often female-led indigenous faith, Muism, dealing with all of life's immediate messes. Then, around the 4th century CE, Silla period, Buddhism arrives, a huge world religion coming from China with state backing. And this kicks off the great syncretic dance.
It's a massive turning point. Buddhism arrives, gets state patronage, sure. But it doesn't try to wipe out the native beliefs. That wasn't the strategy. Instead, Korean religion almost immediately becomes deeply syncretic. Buddhism finds ways to coexist, even merge with shamanic practices.
Why? Why didn't the big, organized, state-backed religion just crush the local folk beliefs? You'd think it would.
I think it comes down to that division of spiritual labor we talked about. Buddhist doctrine, it focuses on the big picture. Nirvana, enlightenment, deep philosophy about suffering, the path to ultimate salvation. Very lofty.
Right. Important, but maybe not helpful if your child is sick right now.
Exactly. For the common person's immediate worldly problems, needing a good harvest, curing an illness, finding something lost, getting rid of a troublesome ghost Buddhism, especially early on, didn't offer much practical, immediate intervention.
So the elites could pursue enlightenment, but everyone else still needed the shaman to, quite literally, keep the family going. Shamanism stayed indispensable.
Absolutely. It was a necessary coexistence. And this whole idea of bridging these worlds, the philosophical and the practical, is maybe best seen in one figure, the Silla monk Wanyo.
Ah, Wanyo, 617 to 686 CE, often called the father of Korean Buddhism. But his life seems like a masterclass in blending high philosophy with folk reality.
He's pivotal. Wanyo was famous for championing religious inclusivity, harmonizing disputes he called Fwajang. His core belief was that all paths, all doctrines, whether they were Buddhist, Taoist, even shamanic, ultimately pointed to the same single truth. His mission was making that truth reachable for everyone.
We hear about his philosophy, but his personal story, his enlightenment moment, really shows that connection, doesn't it? The skull
Oh, it's legendary.
Yeah.
And it completely defines his path. He was trying to get to Tang, China, the center of Buddhist learning at the time, to study. He's traveling with his companion, Usang. They get caught in a storm, take shelter overnight in what they think is just an earthen dugout.
Okay.
In the dark, Wanyo gets thirsty, finds a container, drinks the water. It tastes cool, refreshing, great. But in the morning light, he wakes up, sees the container was actually a human skull. And the water was stagnant, disgusting, probably full of rainwater and grime.
Right. The realization that followed changed everything for him.
Instantly. The shock hits him, and he has this powerful insight. All phenomena arise from the mind. He realized the water tasting good or bad wasn't about the water itself, but his own mental state, his perception.
So he didn't need to go to China to learn?
Exactly. He declared the truth was already within him. He turned right around, abandoned the trip, and went back to Silla.
And this breakthrough led him to interact with ordinary people in a really radical way for a high-ranking monk.
Totally radical.
Yeah.
He left the formal monastic life, preached as a layman. And he used methods everyone could access. Singing songs, chanting, even dancing in the marketplaces. Our sources specifically say his behavior was strikingly reminiscent of a shaman's performance.
He was using the language of the people, the performative style they understood.
Deliberately. Using the popular indigenous cultural language to spread Buddhist ideas, the Dharma, making sure it connected with the non-literate majority.
He really did bridge that gap. And his syncretic legacy, it even extended into his family life, didn't it?
It's a fantastic detail, yeah. It shows the flexibility of the time. After leaving monastic life, Wanyo had a son, Sol Chong, with a princess. And Sol Chong grew up to be a pioneer of Korean Confucianism. He developed a system for writing Korean using Chinese characters.
Wow. So Wanyo is the father of Korean Buddhism and the grandfather of Korean Confucianism.
Unofficially, yes. He physically embodied the kind of harmony he preached. Just amazing.
So, influenced by people like Wanyo, Buddhism didn't just tolerate Mormonism, it started actively absorbing its roles, its spirits.
That absorption really sped up. By the late 7th century, you see the rise of what's called esoteric or occult Buddhism. This branch focused heavily on ritual, mantras, and specifically on rites to avert calamities, practical stuff.
Taking over the shaman's public functions.
Pretty much. This school took on many of the public ritual roles that shamans used to perform. You had Buddhist monks doing these very performative rites, sometimes even wearing costumes, using rhythmic music, chants. Very similar to what a mudang would do.
So it was like a religious rebranding, bringing folk practices under the temple umbrella?
You could see it that way. And shamanistic gods got reinterpreted. They became Buddhist guardians, protectors of the Dharma. The mountain spirit, Sanchin, for example, got absorbed into the Buddhist pantheon. Even today, it's super common to find a special shrine, a Sanchin gak, right inside a Korean Buddhist temple complex.
The native spirit of the land welcomed into the imported religion's home.
It shows that for Buddhism to really take root, it needed to honor those powerful local deities.
And this successful blend wasn't just tolerated, it was formally embraced by the next dynasty, the Goryeo dynasty.
Right. Goryeo, 918–1392, made Buddhism the state religion, but the blending just continued smoothly. The founder, King Tayo Wangyeon, was very aware of the power of native beliefs. In his famous 10 injunctions for his successors, he explicitly told them to honor Korea's native spirits.
Alongside Buddha.
Absolutely. He mandated worshiping heaven, the mountains, the rivers, right alongside Buddhist practices in big state festivals like the Palgwan Festival.
So state ritual wasn't purely Buddhist, it was intentionally hybrid.
Deliberately. The Palgwan Festival was this massive ceremony designed to get protection from both the native spirits and the Buddha, all for national stability, good harvests, things like that. And throughout the Goryeo period, mudang were still essential, absolutely central for things like rainmaking rituals in the Kawaji during droughts, or for performing intense exorcisms when plagues hit.
Life or death stuff.
Exactly. Roles that the formal Buddhist clergy, who were maybe more focused on philosophy or running the monasteries, weren't always equipped or inclined to handle.
Okay, so it sounds like Silla and Goryeo created this really integrated spiritual system. You had high philosophy, practical folk intervention, all working together, sanctioned by the state. But that delicate balance just gets smashed with the arrival of the Joseon dynasty.
Smashed is the right word. The Joseon dynasty, 1392–1910, was a dramatic, and for Muism, a devastating shift. The new ruling ideology was Neo-Confucianism. And it was rationalist, intensely patriarchal, focused on social ethics, order, hierarchy.
And it looked down on Muism.
Looked down is putting it mildly. It viewed Muism as irrational superstition. The term was misound and as morally corrupting chaos that threatened the strict social order they wanted to impose.
This wasn't just a change in preference, it was an ideological attack.
A deep systematic cleansing, really. The Confucian elite classified shamans as the lowest of the Locheon men class, alongside butchers, slaves, entertainers. They were seen as frauds or just performers. The state tried to ban their practices, tax them heavily, drive them out of the cities, especially the capital.
And the writings from the time?
Relentless condemnation. Confucian scholars just hammered away, describing female shamans as scheming, lewd, divisive, immoral charlatans who manipulated ignorant women and the uneducated masses.
Wow. That's state-sponsored misogyny being used to attack female religious power. How on earth did the Mudang survive 5 centuries of that kind of official scorn?
Well, fundamentally, because Neo-Confucianism created this huge spiritual vacuum. It was brilliant at organizing society, defining ethical relationships, standardizing ancestor rights for the public good. It offered basically no cosmological answers for disease, drought, personal misfortune, or mental anguish. It focused entirely on the social how, but ignored the personal why of suffering,
So, as long as bad things happened.
which they always do. Ordinary Koreans, and especially women who were so restricted by Confucian roles, still needed someone to turn to for these essential everyday concerns: health, luck, anxieties. Confucianism just didn't have practical answers for that stuff.
Shamans filled the gap.
They had to. And the irony is, even the elite society that condemned them sometimes had to rely on them. There was a political usefulness to the very superstition they officially hated.
How so?
It's maybe the biggest irony of the Joseon period. While publicly despising shamans, even high-ranking Neo-Confucian officials would often quietly approve, or sometimes even directly resort to, shamanic rain-making ceremonies, the kawuji, during bad droughts.
If they thought it was nonsense.
Because the rituals worked, or at least the populace deeply believed they worked. And ensuring agricultural prosperity was absolutely essential for keeping the regime stable. If the crops failed year after year, the dynasty itself was threatened. So ideology had to take a back seat to political reality sometimes.
Wow. The state needed the very people it classified as social outcasts. But the real heart of survival during this time, the spiritual archive and the place for release, was the ritual itself, right? The gut.
Oh, the gut was absolutely central to Muism's resilience. It remained this vibrant, dramatic, often highly entertaining ceremony. You got rhythmic music, intense drumming, dynamic dancing, amazing colorful costumes, the sinbok that the shaman changes into constantly.
And the purpose isn't solemn worship, exactly.
The main aim is described as mago nolda. It literally means to feed the spirits and have them play. It's basically throwing a great party for the gods to keep them happy, get their blessings, and ward off misfortune.
I think the description of what happens during the gut, especially with the female Mudang, gives us such a powerful insight into Joseon society. It wasn't just a ritual, it was like a temporary break from the rules.
It absolutely functioned as a crucial safety valve. During the trance parts, when the shaman is possessed by spirits, there's this space for incredible social subversion. To channel powerful male figures, maybe a famous general, a government official, even the spirits of the male ancestors of the family, sponsoring the gut, the female Mudang puts on these elaborate male costumes.
Taking on the identity of the ruling class.
Exactly. And sources note that in a typical prosperity ritual, a Jesu gut, more than half the costumes worn might be male outfits. And in that possessed state, channeling that male authority figure, she can use humor, sometimes really bawdy, explicit jokes, to directly make fun of the rigid male officials, the whole Confucian power structure.
Wow, that must have been incredibly cathartic.
Hugely cathartic. It provided this collective release for marginalized women, for commoners who had no other public way to voice criticism or frustration with the social order. For that moment, during the spirits' play, the strict patriarchal rules were suspended, divinely sanctioned.
That is resilience defined. Muism survives Joseon not just by offering practical help, but by creating this vital, performative, psychologically necessary cultural space. And that resilience set the stage for its next big adaptation in the 19th century, the revolutionary blend called Donghak.
Right. The 19th century was a time of crisis for Korea. Internal corruption, the Joseon state weakening, plus increasing pressure from the outside, especially Western powers, and the arrival of Catholicism, which they called Seohak, Western learning.
And into this mess steps Cho Jae-yu.
Cho Jae-yu, also known as Sunon, lived from 1824 to 1864. He saw this profound spiritual and political vacuum and founded Donghak, meaning Eastern learning, in 1860. It was explicitly created as a syncretic response, a Korean way to counter Western influence and revitalize the nation.
He wasn't just mixing things randomly, though. He built a theology that took core indigenous ideas and made them central, ready for a new era.
Absolutely. The key moment was his divine revelation. He received teachings directly from Sangjae, the Lord of Heaven, also called Cheonju. And crucially, Cho explicitly identified this supreme being with the ancient Korean heavenly god Hanolim.
So he took that somewhat distant high god from Muism
And brought him right to the forefront. Elevated this core shamanic concept into a central, organized, almost monotheistic-sounding theology. It was designed to stand up to the monotheism of Catholicism, but feel deeply Korean.
Okay, so what exactly went into the Donghak mix? What did he blend together?
Donghak was the ultimate synthesis, really. It took the ethical framework and social order from Neo-Confucianism, the compassion and focus on salvation from Buddhism, ideas about meditation and energy flow to Taoism,
All built on a shamanic foundation.
all anchored firmly in native shamanic beliefs and practices.
Let's talk about that energy, G, and the core doctrine in I Ching. That sounds central.
Innation is the absolute cornerstone. It translates as humanity is heaven. The idea is that humans and heaven are fundamentally one and the same. This was revolutionary.
How so?
Well, Neo-Confucianism stressed hierarchy, principally. Choji Yu focused instead on the Taoist idea of Gi, this vital energy flowing through everything, and taught that divinity wasn't out there somewhere, but resided within every single person.
That sounds very close to the animistic core of shamanism, seeing spirit everywhere.
Deeply resonant with it, yes. The divine isn't something distant you strive for, it's something you are, inherently. And the rituals Cho taught had very clear links back to shamanic practices for health and well-being.
What were those rituals?
During his revelation, he received two key practical gifts. First, a special talisman, a yungbu, a unique symbol drawn on paper. This was meant to be burned, the ashes mixed with water, and then drunk by the follower.
Ingested. Wow.
Yes. And second, an incantation, a chumun, to be chanted repeatedly. These practices, drawing a sacred symbol, ingesting it, repetitive chanting, directly mirrored traditional shamanic healing methods used for restoring spiritual balance and physical health.
Drinking the talisman. That's a very physical, intimate way to connect with the divine.
It was meant to show that immediate internal connection between the Lord of Heaven and the practitioner, literally taking the divine energy into your body. This made Donghak feel both deeply traditional and incredibly radical to the Gojoseon establishment.
And ultimately too radical. It was dangerous for Chojo.
Yes. Donghak was inherently communal, egalitarian. It directly challenged the rigid Confucian social order and the government's absolute control over religious rituals. Plus, advocating for a god whose commands might override the king's, well, the authorities panicked. They confused it with Catholicism, saw both as equally dangerous foreign threats. Chojo was arrested and executed in 1864 for heresy.
But killing the founder didn't kill the movement. It tapped into something too deep.
Exactly. The ideology was too rooted in Korean needs. It went underground and eventually fueled the massive Donghak Peasant Revolution in 1894, a huge event in modern Korean history. And later, the movement evolved into Cheondogyo, the religion of the heavenly way, formally set up in 1905. It carried that Muism legacy forward, but in a modern, organized form, still emphasizing spiritual healing and benefits in this life.
Okay, so we followed Muism through ancient myths, the Silla synthesis, Gojoseon suppression, the Donghak Revolution. Now we bring it into the 20th and 21st centuries. And this period brought yet another wave of intense suppression.
The 20th century was brutal. First, Muism was attacked by the Japanese colonial authorities. They used its backwardness as an excuse to legitimize Japanese rule and try to erase Korean culture.
Standard colonial playbook.
Right. Then, after liberation, the early South Korean governments, often influenced by rapidly growing Christian groups, also scorned it. Both saw Muism as this irrational superstition, an obstacle to modernization.
And the push in the 1970s under Park Chung-hee sounds particularly harsh, the anti-superstition movement.
It was a deliberate campaign to erase it, supposedly to clear the way for industrial progress. Police were actively arresting Undying. They forcibly burned down shrines, confiscated drums, bells, costumes, essential ritual tools. The official line was that shamanism was irrational and holding back national development.
It really sounds like that should have been the end, a final death blow. But then comes this extraordinary twist, something about cultural memory kicking back in.
It's amazing. By the 1980s, things started to shift. There was this growing sense of cultural nationalism in South Korea, a desire to rediscover authentic Korean heritage after decades of colonialism and rapid westernization. And suddenly, the perception of shamanism began to change.
How so?
It started gaining recognition as, believe it or not, a valuable, intangible cultural asset. Specific gut ceremonies, which are often incredibly complex artistic performances, started getting official protection. Like the Gangneung Ganoje Festival, it's now recognized by UNESCO.
So the Mudan goes from being a low-class criminal to a protected national treasure.
In a way, yes. The Mudang was rehabilitated. No longer just a stigmatized rural fortune teller, but now also seen as a respected, though still often marginal, keeper of ancient Korean traditions and performing arts.
And the most astonishing thing might be just how many are practicing today, despite all that history and the lingering stigma. You found some demographic data.
The numbers are genuinely staggering. Our sources estimate there are somewhere between 300,000 and 400,000 active Mudang in South Korea right now.
300,000 to 400,000.
Yes. If you do the math, that's roughly one shaman for every 130 to 180 people in the country. It demonstrates this incredible, enduring demand, even in a society famous for being hyper-modern and tech-savvy.
Which brings us right to the modern paradox. Huge numbers practicing, but still facing intense stigma. Why both?
The stigma is definitely still there. A lot of it comes from religious prejudice, especially from some conservative Christian communities. And also negative media portrayals, focusing on scam artists or sensationalizing things. Surveys show most shamans, maybe 7 out of 10, feel society views them negatively. They still struggle with that historical label of myths and superstition.
Okay, so if the stigma is real, why are so many people, including urban, educated Koreans, still seeking them out? What need are they fulfilling now?
They're meeting modern needs, particularly around stress and anxiety. South Korea's society is famously high pressure, hyper-competitive. People sometimes call it hell Gojoseon, implying today's pressures are as tough as living under the old rigid dynasty.
Right, the pressure to succeed is immense.
Exactly. So many people, especially younger Koreans, turn to shamans for guidance, for psychological relief.
Yeah.
The shamanic worldview offers comfort because it allows you to explain misfortunes, anxieties, failures, not just as your personal fault in a brutal system, but maybe as workings of fate, or interference from ancestors, or some other spiritual imbalance.
It's like spiritual counseling for the pressures of modern life, reframing failure.
In a way, yes. And this isn't just happening among ordinary people. The practice extends right up to the top. The sources suggest Korea's religious scene is still very fluid. It's pretty common for people who aren't strict Christians to participate in music alongside whatever other faith they follow.
And we hear rumors.
Constantly. Credible rumors about corporate executives holding private gut ceremonies before launching a new business, K-pop idols getting blessings before a big comeback, even politicians consulting shamans before elections for important decisions.
So beneath the surface of modern rationality, when the stakes are high, the unseen world still gets acknowledged. It reinforces how successful that syncretism has always been.
It really shows that no matter the dominant ideology, Buddhism focusing on enlightenment, Confucianism on ethics, modern capitalism on efficiency, Muism has consistently stepped in to fill the gap for practical, immediate personal well-being and crisis management.
So, looking back at this incredible journey from ancient myths to the tech hubs of Seoul, what does it all tell us about Korean spiritual identity?
I think it shows Muism has always been the spiritual undercurrent. It survived and thrived because it addressed the practical, everyday human needs for healing, for luck, for explaining the unexplainable, for mediating conflict needs that the more formal, organized religions often couldn't or wouldn't fully address.
That need gave it its continuity.
Exactly. That constant need ensured its continuity and amazing adaptability. It's why the Undying is still such an active figure today.
And that figure, the Muism, has reinvented herself so many times. From a respected royal advisor in ancient times to a low-caste healer under Joseon, and now a culturally protected yet still often stigmatized spiritual practitioner. But the core job hasn't changed.
Still the negotiator. The mediator between the seen world and the unseen world, that fundamental role persists.
And that negotiation, that survival, often still takes the form of this incredibly dramatic, artistic, cathartic public performance.
The gut it endures.
Which leads us perfectly to our final provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider. Think about this. The single most resilient element of Korean spiritual identity, the thing that survived conquests, suppressions, modernizations. It isn't a scripture, it isn't philosophy. It's the spontaneous, rhythmic, sometimes loud in body, drumming and dancing of the gut ritual. So what does it tell you about a culture when its most enduring tradition is essentially throwing a fantastic, elaborate party for the gods?
Maybe it suggests that the deep shared experience of communal release, of catharsis through rhythm and performance, is actually more fundamental, more necessary for spiritual survival than any rigid doctrine could ever be.
Like something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the undying syncretic soul of Korea.